Michael, are you recording the session? All right, recording has started. So thanks so much for the opportunity to speak as a part of the Innovative Cities Lecture Series. It's a great thing that we get to do as a part of the department, and it's just an honor when I get a chance to do it today. So my name is Bob Schneider. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an associate professor here in the Department of Urban Planning at UW-Milwaukee. And I'm presenting along with Andrew Schmitz, who is a Master's of Urban Planning student and almost graduated and completed the program. So Andrew, you want to say hi so you can get on the screen for a sec?
Sure. Hi, my name's Andrew, and yeah, I'm about to graduate from the program and have been working with Bob on various research projects.
Not getting any.
3 semesters.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Andrew's been working with me a lot and put in a bunch of time on this project and several others. So I truly appreciate all of the work that he's done. I should also say that this particular project has features some work that Haley Shinkowski has done as well. And so you'll see a little bit of that along the way. And at this point, I'm going to start sharing my slides so that we can get into the presentation. All right. Oops. Sorry about that. All right, can everybody see the screen there?
Yes.
Yep, looks great.
Okay, thanks. So the title of our presentation is Where Are Milwaukee's Safe and Healthy Streets and Why Not Everywhere? And with the second part of the title, I don't really want you guys to focus on why not everywhere based on, the past and how we've developed our transportation system, though we need to certainly recognize that the past choices that have been made in terms of transportation system development and broader system changes have produced what we have today. But what I really want everybody to focus on is why not everywhere in the future, in terms of how we develop our transportation system moving forward. And what can our streets look like going into the future? So with that, I want to focus on the idea of streets as arguably being the most important public space. This is a picture of my family and me. This summer, we were walking home from a garden store where we picked up our flowers and plantings for the spring. We were going down one of Milwaukee's active streets. And these are streets this past summer that were closed to through automobile traffic, but open to everybody else. And we were able to walk right down the center of the street, bike, walk with a stroller with no problems at all. It felt incredibly comfortable. Occasionally, a car would pass us as somebody was going to their house and they'd wave as they went by at 5 or 10 miles an hour. It was a truly enjoyable experience in that public space. Not all streets have this characteristic, but what if we could make more places all across the entire city and in all of our communities be excellent public spaces and great for social interaction, as well as for the transportation needs of a variety of different modes. Streets not only are used for people to interact, but they're used for transportation. And this is where some of the challenges with our current streets really come into play. In some cases, our streets have developed in a way that really only focuses on the purpose of transportation and really only on the purpose of moving automobile traffic as quickly as possible from one place to another. And in doing this, we really miss out on some of the other important functions of streets. Are we able to cross it safely? Are we able to see and interact with other people in a comfortable way. And in some cases, we've gone so far that you may not even see people at all on the streets. You just see moving vehicles. And so what does this do to a neighborhood? Well, we had the opportunity through a grant project that came through the Wisconsin Advancing Healthier Wisconsin Endowment, Healthier Wisconsin Partnership Program, managed by the Medical College of Wisconsin, and with key lead partners, Wisconsin Bike Federation, the City of Milwaukee Department of Public Works, and us at UW-Milwaukee, to really investigate what people think of their streets and where are safe and healthy streets. And I would argue that people often think there are certain parts of the city or there are certain streets where, frankly, it isn't safe, and they simply accept that idea. But I don't think we should accept the idea that there are some streets or some neighborhoods that are less safe or less healthier than others. And so how can we actually improve equity by providing safe and healthy streets more broadly? I think that is at the heart of the systems change that this particular grant gets at. And I want to acknowledge that the survey responses that we're going to highlight in this presentation are the result of a lot of work among this entire grant team. The principal investigators, people who pilot tested the survey like Caressa Givens at the Wisconsin Bike Fed, people like Mike who helped get the mail survey out through the Department of Public Works, and everybody else who reviewed survey questions and provided input on it. Of course, all the work that's been done by Andrew and Haley in particular in terms of analyzing and coding some of the responses. So definitely want to acknowledge that the work that you're seeing today is a reflection of many people coming together. The information about people's streets in Milwaukee and their perceptions of them comes from a survey that we did this past summer called the Milwaukee Safe and Healthy Streets Survey. It asked questions about how enjoyable different types of transportation are in your neighborhood: walking, biking, riding the bus, driving, or riding in a car. Also, what are people's perceptions of street traffic? How safe do they feel around that traffic? How safe do they feel in terms of crime or personal security? And then we had some questions about general neighborhood characteristics and information about people's self-reported health. Do you have physical health challenges or mental health challenges? Then an important part of the survey were open-ended question boxes where people could add their thoughts and provide specific quotes to illustrate what they really mean about their neighborhood characteristics or feelings about traffic safety. And so you'll hear people's voices come through in the quotes that we share here. Overall, we received 801 total responses. And it's really important to understand how these responses were received. There were two different methods that we used to distribute the survey. One was through the mail to a random sample of residential addresses. So this went to all 15 alder districts. We really thought it was important to get the entire city represented. And so this is the way that we were able to do that. I received 158 responses that way. Then we also had an online version of the survey, and that was shared in a snowball type fashion. It first went out through the Department of Public Works e-notify system. It also went out through groups like Milwaukee Safe and Healthy Streets and Wisconsin Bike Fed. And so we got 643 responses that way. The responses, the people who responded to each of these types of methods are actually somewhat different. As expected with the mail surveys, we got a broader representation across the city. There's a smaller number of those, but we were able to get responses from some of the alder districts and neighborhoods that didn't get reached as well through the online surveys. Online surveys are probably going to be reaching people who are better connected with bicycle infrastructure investment or bicycle infrastructure advocacy and other types of interests in streets, just at the core of the people's professional networks. Whereas a mail survey going to random addresses is truly getting a better representation of people who are residents who may not be as interested in bicycling or walking, for example. So if we look at where these responses were given in a little bit more detail, the largest responses to the online survey came from the East Side and Bayview, also the Washington Heights, Washington Park neighborhood. The darker green colors represent that. So these are responses per 10,000 residents. You can compare that with the broader response from the mail survey. And when we look at the socioeconomic characteristics of the survey respondents, this mail survey better represents the Black and Hispanic communities, large households. And so it's a little bit better representation of the city's population as a whole that we understand from the census data. But it still underrepresents each of those groups to some extent. And it also still underrepresents zero-car households, families with kids, and people who are aged 18 to 24. So when you're seeing the responses and the results that we present, understand that there is some underrepresentation of these particular groups. One example of this is looking at all of the survey responses. And when we asked, essentially, rate the travel mode and how much you enjoy it, people really enjoy walking. That received the most ratings of enjoyable or very enjoyable. The email respondents in the lighter green bar were more likely to say that they really enjoyed walking, though still many of the people who were randomly selected through mail also enjoyed walking. And you can see how some of the other modes are less popular. Bicycling is an interesting one, though. Email respondents were much more likely than the mail respondents to say we really like biking, and that may reflect the type of distribution that was done through often bike-oriented advocacy-connected groups. Another thing to say about bicycling is that maybe people don't enjoy it as much from the random selection for other reasons. Maybe there's concerns about safety within particular neighborhoods, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. So one really neat thing that we've done with the data is an effort that Andrew did, and I would like him to show this, but we've explored the data through an online GIS dashboard. And I'm going to turn the screen over to him so he can show a demonstration of what some of the responses look like on that dashboard. All right.
Let me know when you can see that.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, yeah, so this was online dashboard that was created to sort of look into this data on a geographic level and just sort of an easy way to explore the data in a visual way. And so just to walk through, first of all, the results, people were asked their nearest major intersection, so that's how we were able to place them geographically on the map. And then we broke them up by aldermanic district. And so the map shows the different districts. They are coded by the number of surveys received. So right now I have it on District 3, which is UW area, River West, Lower East Side. And so that was where we got the most surveys. And then above that, you can see the breakdown between mail and online, which is important context. And then along with that, some of these demographic information. So this is coming from the people that actually filled out the survey, not the actual demographic information. And again, just provide some context for how representative the data may be. And then so the main portion of this are these pie charts that graphically show some of the results of the question groupings that we asked. So how much people enjoy certain modes, how safe it is based on street traffic and crime and personal security, and then some characteristics of their neighborhoods. And so these are set up that you can on these different tabs, you can see the different modes while you have a certain district selected. And so right now I have these all set to walking, and then in this neighborhood characteristic, the places to walk to. And so obviously these things are very related. The safety of walking in your neighborhood will affect how much you enjoy it, and also how many, like, the places you have to walk to in your neighborhood. And so this tool just lets you explore how this differs across different areas of the city. So right now I have it on District 3, but if you go to, say, District 2, which is northwest side, kind of centered on Fond du Lac Avenue, which is a kind of a high volume, high speed corridor, actually turns into a highway there. But you see that shift from overwhelmingly positive on all of these to more of a negative shift. And so this tool not only lets you just see the differences between different areas, but you can also see similarities through it. So if I just click through these different characteristics, so for example, traffic speeds is something that no matter where you go in the city, you see this overwhelmingly negative perception of traffic speeds in people's neighborhoods. But then also, like, on the positive side, and I think Bob will get into this more later, so if I go over to friendliness of neighbors, that's something that no matter where you go in the city, you're going to see that people have this overwhelmingly positive perception of neighborhood friendliness. And so that's just sort of a basic overview. I think when the presentation's over, I can actually just put a link to this in the chat so people can kind of poke around at the data themselves. But that just gives you an idea. And so with that, I can turn it back over to you, Bob.
All right, thanks, Andrew. Let me see if I can get this started back on mine. All right, and there we go. All right, can everybody see that again?
Yep.
Great. By the way, that work that Andrew has done is an example of something that was done through his GIS class that he took with Paul Praskis. And the skills that he's learned in there are something that I have no idea how to do. And that's really impressive in terms of being able to show this type of information. So Andrew, thanks for all the work that you put into that. And I hope everybody gets a chance to check that out after we're done with the presentation. What I want to do now is move into some analysis of the 158 mail responses. And so when we want to do a little bit more quantitative comparison of neighborhood areas, using the mail responses is helpful because they have been distributed more randomly. And so this is a comparison of lower versus higher income neighborhoods. Throughout the comparison, I'm also going to bring in some quotes. These come from both the mail and the online versions of the surveys, but any graph that you see is just going to be using these 158 mail responses. The areas that we use to designate lower income areas versus higher income areas of the city are called neighborhood revitalization strategy areas. And this is a designation by the Department of City Development. So they can use community development block group funds in these particular areas. But basically they're the lower income tracts and they represent about 61% of the city population. When you look at the mail survey responses themselves, 37 of our responses through the mail came from these NRSAs. 121 came from outside the NRSAs. So this is the comparison that I'm making, the responses from the 37 versus the 121 here. So if we look again at the same sort of graph that I showed you before in terms of the level of enjoyability that people reported, walking again is still the most enjoyable for both groups in lower income areas and in higher income areas of the city. However, the asterisks, the stars over on the left side by walk and by bicycle indicate that there's a statistically significant difference in the amount of enjoyment that's being reported within the lower income areas versus the higher income areas of the city. And so we see some larger disparities when you look in particular at bicycle. And this is quite interesting because it may be something about the infrastructure in these communities or the social perception of bicycling in these communities. So results can help show us a little bit more. And in fact, when we look at the respondents who reported feeling unsafe or very unsafe with respect to traffic safety in their neighborhood, these lower income areas say that they're most concerned about bicycling. So one of the things that we can think about is, well, can we make these streets safer for bicycling? And that will most likely also change people's perception of that mode. When we think about traffic safety, though, one of the biggest concerns that comes to mind is reckless driving. And the open-ended box under that question gathered many responses about traffic safety. And without being prompted to answer anything about reckless driving, 55 of the 801 respondents said something related to reckless driving. They used the word reckless. And you can see there's people who responded in all parts of the city saying that they were concerned about some aspect of reckless driving. This is a big deal here in Milwaukee. What is the primary aspect of reckless driving that people are concerned about? Well, you can see some of their quotes. It's dangerous. There's a lot of citizens drive reckless with no regard for anyone's safety. Tailgating, texting, and talking on the phone, for example. People in other responses mentioned people passing on the right or running red lights. But the most common thing that we heard of was speeding. And speeding is the aspect of reckless driving that I think represents it the most in terms of what we heard from this survey. The cars that exceed the speed limit are causing serious danger on the roads. Cars drive so fast on nearby streets, and it is scary to walk. So these are the sorts of concerns that people are reporting, and it's very clear it comes throughout the survey. And you're going to hear about this issue of speeding several more times as I continue through the results. We move on to thinking about personal security as well. We can see these are residents that rated particular modes as unsafe or very unsafe. Concerns about assault or crime may be in the back of their minds. And walking and biking, again, are perceived as unsafe, whereas driving and being a passenger are a little bit less. But it's very interesting to see, especially in these lower income neighborhoods of the city, what a disparity there is when we have in the perceptions of personal security. Every mode except the bus has significantly higher concerns about personal security, even driving, which is very interesting. So these are some examples of personal security concerns. I often walk late at night alone on the east side, but there are times I've felt unsafe. You know, it depends on which street and which corner I'm on. I try not to walk alone at night. These are concerns that are showing that the streets are not truly open public spaces that everybody feels comfortable in. We also looked in depth at the neighborhood perceptions that people responded to. We had a number of characteristics of each neighborhood, and these are ones that the graph is showing ones that got rated as poor or very poor. But I do want to start out first with the positive side here. And as Andrew was saying, people in many neighborhoods across the city were saying that they had positive views of their neighbors. They thought they were friendly. And yes, the lower income neighborhoods do have a significantly higher percentage of people who rated this, the friendliness of their neighbors as poor or very poor, but it's still a relatively low percentage at 20%. So you have many people saying, my neighbors are nice, the neighborhood is friendly, people are friendly and watch out for each other. This is a very positive attribute that we can look at and maybe enhance as a part of how we move forward with improving our streets. Another positive aspect of the neighborhood responses was bus service. Even though people didn't respond strongly in saying that they enjoyed taking the bus, they also generally think that we have a pretty good bus system and appreciate bus service that we have. And so there's a couple of positive things here to really note. But I want to contrast that again with the positive things people say and what their caveat is. And we heard again and again the same sort of comment. I really like my neighborhood, but I don't like the traffic and how driver behavior is within it. I love my neighborhood, but I wish there was less space devoted to cars. People here are nice and basically good, but the littering and fast, careless driving are bad. So these are concerns that are really affecting people's perceptions of their neighborhood. Even though they think it's good, traffic safety is a key concern. So there's a concern about traffic speeds really citywide as well. You see the percentages here. When you look at it on the map, these are just the 158 responses through the mail. The majority of them are saying, especially in the lower income areas, that there are poor or very poor traffic speeds. It means people are going too fast. But all across the city, this is viewed as a problem. So citywide negative views of traffic speeds. Another key result when people responded about their neighborhood characteristics was what I would call perceptions of disinvestment in lower income neighborhoods relative to the higher income neighborhoods of the city in terms of cleanliness, places to walk to, opportunities for exercise. I'll just illustrate a few of these points about cleanliness. Businesses close and trash builds up, but nobody cleans it up. Some areas have more garbage and trash on the street. There are concerns about rental houses and landlords not taking care of their properties. Places to walk to, I want to contrast a couple of different neighborhoods of the cities. These are mainly east side neighborhoods where they said, we have lots of places to walk to, and they really love how walkable it is. I love the walkability of the neighborhood. I can get to restaurants, coffee shops, a corner store, parks very easily. Contrast that with some of the other neighborhoods. I wish there were more nice businesses within walking distance, no businesses to patronize except liquor stores and a gas station. So having things in your neighborhood that you can walk to, that you really, there's activity locations you want to go to, are so important to your feeling about the neighborhood. And lastly, I definitely want to highlight the contrast here between some of the lower income neighborhoods and the higher income neighborhoods of the city. These are respondents who said there were poor or very poor opportunities for exercise. And so you can see the lower income areas highlighted in purple have many of the red dots. There's hardly any people saying that who live on the east side and down in Bayview. A last point, since this grant focused a lot on health as well, is that people who are living in the lower income neighborhoods did generally report poor health in terms of their general health and physical and mental health challenges, but there weren't significant differences in this self-reported measure. And this is in contrast to how significant some of the differences were in terms of their perceptions of personal security, as well as concerns about traffic safety. So summarizing the results from the survey, lots of positives in terms of friendly neighbors. The activity of walking itself is viewed very positively. People want to be able to do it more, essentially. The big traffic safety concern is reckless driving, and in particular speeding. But of course, there's key differences by neighborhood. The traffic safety and personal security barriers to some of these modes of transportation are more significant in the lower income areas, communities of color. Places to walk to, less. There's fewer of those, fewer opportunities of exercise, and less cleanliness in terms of these ideas, or in terms of disinvestment from neighborhoods. And so these are some of the problems that we found in the survey. So we don't just identify problems, though, as urban planners. We really think about, well, what should be done and what could be done. And I want to emphasize that we have ideas to share in terms of how to potentially improve streets. But it's really, really important to engage with community members and see what they think about these ideas. It's a conversation. And so past mistakes made by transportation planners have been to say, oh, we know that you want this particular type of street and really want to see the emphasis be on moving automobiles as fast as possible. Was that done with truly asking neighborhood residents what they think? We don't want to make the same mistakes with these types of needs in terms of streets. So it's important to engage with community. It's also important to understand that community members may not understand all the options they have to change their streets. One of the most common things that you'll hear, one of the most common requests that you'll hear from neighborhood residents to improve their streets is to ask for speed humps. They're concerned about traffic speed. Speed humps can help slow traffic going down residential streets. However, speed humps, well, they are one tool in the toolbox, may not be able to address or actually help with some of the other things that we'd like to see a street be. So yes, maybe speed humps can help slow automobile speeds, but are they contributing to making the street greener and be a more attractive place? Are they providing space for more different types of users? And even in terms of slowing automobile speeds, it's not common for speed humps or that type of raised traffic calming device to be used on an arterial street. And that's where many of our speeding problems are occurring. So what can be done more broadly? What are some of the other tools besides speed humps that neighborhood residents should be aware of and that we can bring to conversations and engage about? So these first three bullets here are things that we can do directly in streets. It's within the purview of people who do street planning, Department of Public Works, the Department of City Development, often will deal with these sorts of issues. But I think it's really important to also understand that there are systems changes beyond the streets that should be addressed. And I'm not going to spend as much time talking about those, but it's incredibly important to understand that we need to also be creating economic opportunity and talking about the reinvestment in the neighborhood as a whole. And so this should be occurring across the city, but especially in neighborhoods that need those types of investments the most. And I'll touch on that at the very end. So what should be done? First of all, let's talk about speed. And many of our arterial streets, this is data from a couple of years ago, speed studies that were done for 48 hours, tubes were out on the street. Department of Public Works collects this information. More than 15% of vehicles exceeding the speed limit by 10 miles an hour or more on all of these streets, most of them multi-lane roadways, multi-lane streets with fairly high posted speed limits, 30 miles an hour. There's very particular speeding problems on a few of these corridors. For example, the corridor pictured here, West Capitol Drive, almost 1,000 vehicles per day traveling greater than 50 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. What does that do to somebody's perception of the street when they're trying to walk along it or walk across it? One of the types of programs that cities are starting to enact across the country is Vision Zero. And at the heart of a Vision Zero program is understanding that we should change a system so that people do not get seriously injured or die. We need to set a vision so that we have streets that don't result in serious injuries or fatalities. This year in Milwaukee, we had more than 70 people killed on the streets through traffic crashes by the end of October. That was up by quite a bit from previous years, but any number greater than zero should not be acceptable. So we need to understand, well, where are the highest risk types of situations? These are on these multi-lane streets with higher vehicle volumes and higher vehicle speeds in general. And so as part of the pedestrian plan that the city did, for example, they identified a high injury network. And so those are some of the places that improvements are being focused. We also need to recognize through Vision Zero that multimodal streets are generally safer. when there's more walking and more biking, there's generally slower speed traffic occurring. And this results in lower injury and lower chances of fatalities in the system. It's safer, not only for pedestrians or bicyclists, but also for drivers. One element that's often done as a part of Vision Zero efforts is to change the design of streets. How can we use what's called a complete streets approach to redesign some of these places? The city passed its complete streets policy back in October of 2018 and is already starting to make some changes. However, there's lots more change that can be done. And this picture illustrates what one idea of a complete streets approach is. The picture on the top shows a street that really says this is for automobile throughput and moving automobiles from place to place. The pedestrians who are crossing that crosswalk, even though it's on the edge of the University of California campus and often used by people crossing, it's like an afterthought in that street corridor. Look at the picture below where you can see the priority becomes that crossing. And at the same time as making those improvements, when the lanes were reduced from 4 lanes down to 2, they also provided space for bicycle lanes. And so those types of improvements are making streets accommodate more types of users. And that's the concept behind complete streets. Complete streets might include dedicated bike lanes that are separated from traffic. We sometimes call these protected bike lanes. We have examples of these in Milwaukee on the North Avenue and Locust Street bridges, Hawley Road, Kilbourne Avenue downtown. In this case, we've got the bike lane on the curb side of the roadway, and then parking is adjacent to the moving traffic. Bicyclists feel safer, and it's a lower stress type of environment to be in. Other types of complete streets improvements include curb extensions, narrowing the crossing distance. This allows pedestrians who are waiting to cross the street to be more visible to cars that are approaching, which should be yielding to them if they're in the crosswalk, according to our state law. Curb extensions can also offer opportunities to add green space or landscaping that wasn't in the streets before. As you can see the example here. Now, curb extensions are often seen as an expensive type of improvement. They don't always have to be, and our city is starting to implement rapid implementation projects, which are low-cost versions of curb extensions and other changes to slow traffic. The Department of Public Works, as a part of the new neighborhood greenway on Fratney Street in River West, added these curb extensions. They're flexible posts that delineate the curb extension space, and then paint is used to highlight it. This has the same general effect as the curb extension, but is done at a much lower cost. It's also temporary, so we can see the impacts on other travel modes. Should this be something that's made more permanent? Well, we're testing it out now. Another example of a rapid implementation project is done on North 27th Street between Wisconsin and State. And this is what it looks like. The curb extensions were added. It's along with a bike lane project as well. So another example of a complete street being done at a relatively low cost. This helps reduce the crossing distances and also reduce traffic speeds in the corridor. One thing that we try to do here in our program is be relevant with students' work and have them do client-based work. Over the last 7 years, I've taught a pedestrian and bicycle class, and in that class, the students have redesigned what an intersection across the city could look like. And so here's one, King Drive, 4-lane street, which is in a very important commercial district, changed into 1 lane in each direction, 2-way turn lanes, but excellent bicycle infrastructure and much safer pedestrian crossings with the curb extensions. I'll go back and forth. So we are producing some ideas as a part of our work here. Advocates around the community are producing some ideas as well. Milwaukee Safe and Healthy Streets is one example of that. But what do community members think of these? And so these are the types of ideas that we want to be bringing to community members and asking, well, what do you think? And do you have other suggestions once you know what some of the possibilities might look like? This example, 6th Street and Wisconsin Avenue, currently 3 lanes in each direction on 6th Street, a really wide Wisconsin Avenue with some on-street parking. What if we change it to look like this? Much more enhanced crossings, better bicycle infrastructure, dedicated bus lanes along Wisconsin Avenue to complement the bus rapid transit line that goes between downtown and the regional medical center in Wauwatosa. That 9-mile stretch of bus rapid transit is going to be added next year. So what if this intersection along with some of those improvements? Many of the improvements that I was showing in the last few slides are examples of what can be done to improve bicycling, improve pedestrian crossing safety as a part of complete streets along major arterial streets. In the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission Vision 2050 plan, they show the red lines here as indicating some enhanced bicycle facilities. Essentially, these are the types of improvements that can be made along all of these red corridors. So there is a plan that already exists saying that this is something that should be considered moving forward. And by 2050, we should be doing it. Exactly which treatment goes on which corridor is something still to be figured out, and definitely needs community engagement to figure out what the best option is for a particular neighborhood, but the vision is there. Some of the streets also should have dedicated bus lanes and have the bus rapid transit routes, like the example I showed on Wisconsin Avenue. The purple lines on this map show that type of network. Some of these routes could potentially be turned into light rail someday, but currently bus rapid transit is most likely the most feasible option for dedicated rapid transit. For our neighborhood streets, one really good option is neighborhood greenways. And another term for these is bicycle boulevards. They've been used in a number of cities across the country, Minneapolis, Portland, Seattle. In this case, in Portland, they lowered the speed limit to 20 miles an hour, not 25, but 20 miles an hour, so that people feel safer around traffic, and it helps address some of the traffic speeding issues. But they don't just include speed limit signs, they also include infrastructure changes where there are shared lane markings with green backs to them to really highlight the route and emphasize that bicyclists will be using this street, and drivers, you should be traveling more at bicyclist speed as you're going down these streets. In Vancouver, British Columbia, they have a one-way street for cars, but then a two-way option for bicyclists with enhanced pedestrian and bicycle crossings at major streets. We are just starting to do these in Milwaukee. North Fratney Street and East Wright Street are the first bicycle boulevards or neighborhood greenways the city has done. And here's the traffic circle that's done just recently. You can see the green there that's been added to a part that was just concrete before. And there's opportunity to make that green space into plantings and other things like that. When you get to the end of this neighborhood greenway connecting over to Kilbourne Park, you have curb extensions so that pedestrians and bicyclists can cross more easily. There's new green space extending the park out into the street instead of being a place that used to be used for on-street automobile parking. And in 2021, a new bubbler bike station is going to be added at this location. These are the types of improvements that can be added across the city, not just in My River West neighborhood. So this map shows the 2010 bike plan and the Fratney Street and Wright Street greenways that have been done, or neighborhood greenways that have been completed. But there are recommendations for these neighborhood greenways all across the city. And so these are some of the improvements that neighborhood residents should know about and be advocating for. A final type of change to our streets that I want to highlight is flexible curbside space. Those are my two kids in the picture. It emphasizes here, first of all, that it's become, if you use curbside space potentially differently than just automobile parking, it can be much more enjoyable for people to spend time there. The people who are in the picture in the background are eating at a restaurant, but outside. Through active streets for businesses during the pandemic, businesses were allowed to expand their restaurant seating areas into that curbside space and really saved some businesses' bottom line during this pandemic time. Curbside space can also be used for greening and green infrastructure like this in Portland. Not only is it more attractive beside the street, but it also helps improve the quality of the runoff and address the runoff issues from streets. You can use curbside space differently in terms of allowing it to be used for bike lanes or for transit. And one side of the street might be used for on-street parking, but the other side is used for a different purpose. And when we think creatively about this public space, maybe it's best used for other purposes besides automobiles altogether. This summer, again, during the pandemic, Active Streets for Businesses allowed some streets to be closed to through traffic and just be open to people, allowing seating out there in a better social environment in that case, and really help the businesses. So some other possibilities that have been envisioned by past students. This past spring, a group looked at this 5-way intersection, very complicated on the south side, intersection of Chavez, Greenfield, and Muskego. Said, well, so much work has gone into thinking about how automobiles could get through this space. What if we actually prioritized thinking about how to make this really good for people? And so their creative idea was to close down the Muskego leg through automobile traffic, and instead make that into a pedestrian-oriented plaza. And that simplifies the intersection. You can see there's still left turn lanes there for automobiles, but you have better bike infrastructure and much more space now for pedestrians and shorter crossing distances. This is a sort of improvement that we can envision. What would neighborhoods residents think about this? What would the local businesses think about this if they see it? And so there's a real need to engage with community members. Our Department of Public Works has started to do a fantastic job of having walks before they do a project. And so they engage with community members and ask, so what are some of the issues along this particular corridor? What are some of the types of improvements you might want to see? Wisconsin Bike Fed has been a partner in doing this in Milwaukee. Safe and Healthy Streets, Caressa Givens has been a key leader for engaging the community members within a particular neighborhood to help be leaders on those walks. The last thing I just want to touch on in terms of improvement that could be done in the transportation system is something that can address this problem of poor or very poor opportunities for exercise. You can see how many people responded in that way. One of the great proposals that's going on right now is a Route of the Badger system, which includes expansion of our trail system throughout southeastern Wisconsin. Two key connections within the city are the 30th Street Corridor Trail and an extension of the Kinnickinnick River Trail. You can see where these trails would generally go and how they might potentially address some of these issues and the desire for opportunities to get out and exercise. So the more residents that can find out about this, the better. And as I alluded to before, of course, just changing the street itself addresses some aspects of traffic safety, but it may not address all the needs that people have along their street. What if there's boarded up buildings and no places to walk to where there's used to be stores, but they're no longer there? What if there's trash in the streets? How can we ultimately build economic opportunity for people? Can we have programs that support entrepreneurship? Ultimately, these types of economic changes are also essential to support safer and healthier streets. And so initiatives that the city has, like trying to bring in more manufacturers or more jobs to a place like Century City, in the heart of the north side, and be locations where people could go a short walking or biking distance from their neighborhood and get to a job. And there's development of places where there's residences living right above grocery stores or right above libraries. And you see this happening to a great extent on the east side and close to downtown. But it's also important to highlight that it needs to happen across the city to give people walkable opportunities. And one great example is QL Means development at the Villard Commons off of Villard Avenue on the north side. What do people think of this when it goes in? Can there be opportunities for more? And I like these maps that Sewer Pack put together as a part of Vision 2050 to really think conceptually about what can be done to reinvest in certain neighborhoods and certain parts of the region. The current growth trend really is to continue development on the edges of our region in suburban areas, often greenfield or farm field development. But what if the new jobs or new employment that came in was focused in those areas like Century City or some of the more abandoned business districts that the city of Milwaukee has, where the general infrastructure is there, but the investment from the private sector and from employers has gone away? What if it's refocused again in the city areas? How would that potentially benefit the streets themselves and really the quality of the neighborhoods? I like to think about how this can potentially impact people. It also offers great opportunities, more places to walk to, more opportunities for public transit. And I'll just end with a final few thoughts before taking questions. Some people may say, you know, a lot of these ideas are great, but it's really hard because they're new ideas and it's hard to get people to actually change and do something different. Well, if this year hasn't been an example, we have the Active Streets for Businesses program that was enacted in just a month or two that allowed businesses to rethink how those curbside spaces and really the street as a whole was used. On Old World 3rd Street downtown, businesses used basically almost an entire half of the street. We were able to make this change and to use that street space differently. There are many other examples that we can think of that could potentially be done like that. And I'd also like to emphasize the positive about how much we like our neighbors. We don't necessarily like the automobile traffic going by on our streets, but we do like the people who walk by as pedestrians and the people who bicycle by typically. So because we like our neighbors, let's take advantage of creating safe and healthy streets where there's opportunities to be with them and use this public space in a way that brings people together rather than being an automobile thoroughfare that separates people in the neighborhood. A couple of final considerations from the survey itself. So when we view these results, it's important to recognize they were collected during a pandemic. And so people may have different thoughts or experiences during that time. And then the random mail and online, these were complementary ways to get a large amount of survey responses, but there's still a limitation to them. If we looked just at the mail surveys, only 37 surveys coming from some of these lower income neighborhoods in the city is still a very small sample size. We need to increase the number of people who are responding so we can hear those voices. So supplementing that, either adding to the number of addresses that are mailed to, or potentially meeting people out on the streets and asking them to take a survey in person. We couldn't do that this year because of the pandemic, but it may be something for the future. Also, this is a resident-based survey. It doesn't ask people who are business owners or patrons or visitors to the city or tourists what they might think of streets, and that would be really useful to know. So I want to say thanks to all of the people who were involved in the grant. Thanks to Andrew and Haley in particular for their work in helping look at these survey data. But most importantly, thank you to all the survey participants who shared their thoughts and their perceptions of their neighborhood so that we can then take action from them. So with that, we'll take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I'm just want to ask, do you want to moderate the questions? Because I see a hand already, and I want to remind everybody that you can raise your virtual hands or type the questions in the chat.
Sounds good. I think, so I'll take my screen sharing down so that everybody can see me and then see others as they ask questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, we don't have your screen now, so.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I'm turning my camera back on. Hi.
And Nancy has the first hand for your information.
All right, Nancy, go ahead. Thanks.
So yesterday was the first time I had gone to campus in a couple of months. And I always drive from the freeway to campus on Locust Street. And there was a car behind me that was wanting to go faster than me. And instead of forcing him to go the speed limit, I did move off onto the right lane. And before I knew it, there was that unexpected curb extension in front of me, which I was really happy to see. Since you do have friends in public works, and maybe James is even here at the meeting, I thought the white color of those bollards was a real problem. I found them to be very camouflaged with the background of the concrete of the street, and I'm afraid it'll be even more so as winter becomes more wintry. So if there's some way to put some orange tape or something on those, I would highly recommend it. But kudos to the city for doing that.
Yeah, so it's an interesting issue because it brings up some of the challenges that you need to think about when implementing new infrastructure. First of all, people need to be aware of it and in some cases be educated about how it should operate. In other cases, we may need to think about the design of it itself so that it's more visible, for example. So your point, I've noticed on the North Avenue Bridge where they have the Jersey barriers essentially separating the bike lanes, that some of the signs, warning signs that are on top of those have gotten knocked off in the past. And so it may to some extent be a maintenance issue because there should be a warning sign on the top of each one of those separators, Jersey barriers, so that when you're going down the street, you can see it in advance. And I don't know if anybody from DPW is on here, but feel free to add to my comment there.
Hey Bob, it's Kate.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Sorry, I was typing a message to James on Slack to let him know. Oh, there was his response back. But thank you, Nancy, for that feedback. And yeah, I think part of it is, the change and the unexpected change that this is something new to you. But I will provide that feedback about the color to our team.
Thank you. That's great. I do have a quick follow-up, which is just where are the bikes gonna go? Because the curb bump out makes it even more challenging for bikes. Is there going to be or another sort of bike street that's parallel to Locust where the bikes can go?
So the Locust has the dedicated bike lanes over the bridge, over the Milwaukee River. And when you go back out this evening, check out how wide that bike lane is. It is designated for bicycles. It's not a travel lane that's along the curb there. And so what you were describing before is really a separator for the bike lane from the travel lane itself. There's only one travel lane in each direction, and then there's bike lanes on the outsides. So it is a bicycle-oriented street. Though your question brings up something else that's one of the challenges that we think about in terms of pedestrian and bicycle facility design, and that is if you add curb extensions, where are bikes accommodated? And so in some cases, you may be able to add curb extensions on a street that really slows traffic and helps create a very slow speed street where bicyclists are comfortable riding on the street with traffic, like those bike boulevard or neighborhood greenway examples that I was showing. The pace of the street really should be a bicycle pace. In other arterial type streets, you can have curb extensions that are done, but have them done through plastic delineators or some other design that allows a bike lane to essentially go through that space and doesn't have to divert around the curb extension. So the cars need to respect that space. There are some ways to accommodate both pedestrians and bicyclists with a curb extension design. All right, and Ivy, I'm not able to see all of the questions that have come in through the chat, so maybe you can help note those too.
Sure. So I see Jaide's question, and I can read out the question, or if she's here, she probably can verbally ask the questions.
Yeah, okay. I see the question now from Jaide. Thanks, good question. To what extent were community-based organizations engaged in helping resident outreach to increase participation? So one way that they were engaged in the initial process of the pilot study in 2019 was doing intercept surveys. And so Caressa with the Wisconsin Bike Fed did a whole bunch of them, but there were also neighborhood organizations who helped with getting those surveys done in those neighborhoods. One thing I'll say related to that is that we weren't able to do the same thing in 2020 because of the pandemic. So we chose to go with the mail route, and so mailed to random addresses. And so we didn't have the support of a local community organization saying, hey, please go out and respond to this survey. It's legitimate, it's important. We know you get lots of surveys. We respect your time and want to help you out with it. All those sorts of things. That's something that I think can be beneficial for the future, but we didn't have the opportunity to do it this year, mainly because of the pandemic. And that I think when we get to the future, the intercept surveys are a great opportunity to involve the community-based organizations to help get strong response.
And I think we have a second virtual hand before the question in the chat.
Okay, yeah, who is that? Go ahead.
Karen?
Hi, this is Kieran. Hi, Rob, or Dr. Schneider.
Yeah, hey.
A question that I thought of after your presentation is kind of just reflecting on like American culture, I guess, in general, and like terms of street use. People are always busy trying to get from one place to the next, and they want to get there as fast as possible. And one thing with like complete streets projects and all the tools that have been proposed with them is requiring people to go slower in terms of speed. And so I guess what are your thoughts on how like to also help with the culture change or societal kind of mindset shift that also has to occur with the slowing down of street speeds?
Yeah, so it's such a great question. It's fundamental to being able to make these types of changes. After people have been used to a system that's been provided for them that's oriented towards higher speed traffic, if they are drivers. Now, just recall that about 18% of Milwaukee households don't own a car. But for those that do and those that do drive quite a bit, they are used to being able to travel at a fairly high rate of speed, and that's part of their daily behavior. how do we change this? And I think the messaging is really important. I don't think that we can just say we need to all slow down our speeds and leave it at that. I think it should be framed in terms of trade-offs, in terms of what we're getting from changing our speeds. So you may be getting a community where your neighbor who's a grandmother, your neighbor who has a couple of kids, they now can cross the street more easily and not worry as much when they're going to the grocery store or going to a neighborhood park or going to church. These are people who now feel less worried about that type of street crossing. What you're also getting is more space for people to make choices to walk or take the bus that now runs faster in its own dedicated lane, or is more comfortable space for walking, which gives people a freedom of choice in terms of how they want to get around. Reallocating the space is going to give people more opportunities to be active in their neighborhood, walking or biking in terms of getting physical activity. And many of the pictures that I was showing are very attractive designs, making streets become much greener. And so you can get all of these different things. And I shouldn't neglect to say, you're also going to get an environment that reduces the number of people who are getting seriously injured or killed across the city if you have these types of changes. The cost of that is to go a little bit slower, and maybe it takes you a minute or 2 minutes longer to go across the city for errands that you need to run in your car. But you get all these other benefits to use the street space differently. So I think it's about how that is framed and how it's communicated to people. So that's my thought on that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. I think I saw a question, was it from Caleb maybe? Sorry if I'm going out of order, I don't.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's Caleb's hand, but I also saw Chris's, I guess that's a comment. So unless Carissa wants to expand her comments, then we'll go to Caleb then.
Yeah, I think Carissa's points are about who the community organizations that she was really instrumental in helping to reach out to get the survey out in 2019. So Jane's Walk and other people in terms of administering surveys during community events. So yeah, thanks, Carissa. Caleb, why don't you go ahead if you got your question?
So this was all really interesting. I guess I'm curious about possibly more anecdotal evidence. What did you guys get responses along Wisconsin Avenue? I guess west of the freeway out to maybe 27th Street. I used to live right over there, so it's a very wide street. It's 2 lanes both ways, but it never, and I don't know if it's the green space in between separating traffic lanes or if it's the activated street space because it's so close to campus. I did never feel like there were these excessive speeds happening on the street. And so I'm curious if other people responded to the survey feeling the same way, if that's just something like a personal anecdote that I have, or if it is a product of multiple things being like activated street spacing, slowing down through traffic.
Yeah, I certainly think that it could have something to do with the very high volumes of pedestrians that car drivers encounter when they're going through the Marquette campus area, and that then changing their behavior. We know that one of the potential reasons why communities that have communities that have lower rates of pedestrian fatalities and pedestrian injuries is because there's lots of pedestrians out on the streets. And so there's an association that's called safety in numbers that may be occurring there along Wisconsin Avenue near Marquette. But I also wanted to turn it over to Andrew to see if he has a response on that. And Andrew, you did some interesting looking at certain corridors that had a minimal number of responses to them. I'm not necessarily think that you'll remember what the responses were on Wisconsin Avenue, but it's worth just saying a little bit about what you did in terms of that analysis. So go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I think like to the specific of that, I seem to recall that we didn't actually get very many responses from that specific area. So I can't really tell you about people's feelings towards that. But there was, yeah, an additional attempt at looking at this geographically to try and break it down towards specific corridors. And so we were able to also associate a lot of surveys with specific corridors. So that's just like another way that this data can be looked at. But to that specific corridor, I seem to recall we didn't really get that many responses. So that could definitely be an area where there would be more of a targeted survey. So there was one done ahead of the 27th Street corridor, that specific project that Bob showed a picture from. They had done just we did a survey just in that area. And so you're really getting that more specific geographic area, getting the data and people's feelings about the streets from that specific area, specific corridor, and that can really lead to more specific interventions and also just identifying what is working about certain places, like you mentioned, Caleb.
Yeah, this is a really good question. And Andrew, thanks for those details about the other survey that we also did, and I didn't even get into that. One just final quick thought on this. We had very low response from the age group 18 to 24. And I think that's very related to the pandemic and doing it over the summer when the campuses didn't have much activity going on at all. And so I think there were fewer people from the Marquette area, students, who would have otherwise responded to the survey.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
And there are two more questions in the chat. And the first question is from Yi-Chong. Can you see that, Bob?
Yeah, okay. Online dashboard. Is there a special reason for using the alder districts instead of other spatial units like neighborhoods to aggregate the data? Yeah, Andrew, we talked about this a lot. So how did we choose the alder districts?
Well, so if you're looking at some of the options, like there are like neighborhoods that are, there's designated neighborhoods, but they're a much smaller unit and they're not really like an official unit. So there's some kind of different definitions. Another possibility was zip code, but zip codes don't align with the city borders the way nicely that alder districts do. And then I think there's some idea that, you know, a lot of these street improvements, they get brought about or, you know, promoted, pushed forward by the alder person. You know, they are interested in having these improvements made. So being able to look at that data within their specific district would be potentially very helpful to them. But then, yeah, also the corridor specific, which we talked to, which is, we're still kind of working on that. So that's like another element that could be brought into that dashboard as well.
Yeah, thanks. Great question, Yi-Chong. I see Brian has a question here as well related to messaging. I gotta get all the way to the bottom. Relating to messaging, does it make sense to broaden the concept of safe streets to include urban heat island effect and heat waves? Climate projections suggest that the number of days over 95 degrees could triple or quadruple by 2050. Additional heat and duration is correlated with higher death rates and poor mental health. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of the conversation that we should definitely have. These street improvements are part of the climate change solution. My students in the PPA class just did a whole bunch of really good research on that. And it's not the entire solution, but certainly one part of it is trying to make our streets less automobile oriented. And the more we can tie to those adverse climate impacts in the future, the stronger argument that we can make for better streets today. Great question. Yes, one other thing to highlight is that one thing that is coming out of the work more broadly from the Department of Public Works, and this isn't directly related to climate change, though climate change is definitely a health issue, is the Complete Streets and Health and Equity report that just came out earlier this year, using some of the data that the city has been collecting on complete streets improvements. The data that we have collected from this survey is going to go into future complete streets implementation or complete streets reports like this health and equity one, to see how are the city's changes being perceived over time, and sort of what measured changes are occurring. So are speeds reducing through those speed studies? Are people walking or biking more? Are there fewer pedestrian, bicyclist, or motorist crashes? All these things the city is starting to track over time. You'll see that in the Complete Streets Health and Equity report. The other thing that you'll see in that report are some case studies, essentially, of projects the city has done, especially ones where they have done a really good job of engaging with community members on the project itself and asking what should be done, and then showing the results of those projects. So definitely check it out. Kate Reardon just shared the link to it.
Awesome. It's always so exciting to see our colleagues' most recent research. And I think it's easy for people to find you. And I don't know if you want to show Andrew and Haley's email address here in the chat or wherever convenient again, so that just in case people have questions for them, they can reach out to them directly as well.
Absolutely. If you guys want to type in your email addresses, feel free. I think just one last thing to say about the work that Andrew and Haley did to go through 800 survey responses absolutely takes a lot of time, but it's also so much thinking that goes into it to categorize what people are saying and to try to truly represent what themes are important to them. And so the work that they did, it was invaluable to this overall grant effort and to the research that we're going to continue to hopefully share more broadly out of this project.
Yeah, totally. And we're so proud of the nice work done by our students. Congratulations. So it's 1:20, and again, the conversation will continue offline, and we'll have more discussion on the report and with our stakeholders. And thank you all, and see you next year, actually.
Sounds great. Thanks again for having me. Thanks for having us.